Welcome back to Echoes of History. Tonight, we drift back through dust and centuries to the slow pulse of the ancient world, to Babylon, where dawn begins not with sound, but with light. The city sleeps beneath the bronze sky, its walls and towers painted gold by the first warmth of the sun. The air carries the scent of clay, river water, and oil. Somewhere, a palm leaf stirs. The Euphrates moves quietly beside the city, broad and patient, its surface broken only by the passing. Boats, their hulls scrape the current softly. The sound is small, steady, like breathing. Along its edge, the city rises, walls of baked mud brick, streets carved by time, houses built close enough that shadows touch before sunrise. A fisherman wakes first. His hut leans toward the river, its roof heavy with dust. He kneels at the bank, rinses his hands in the cold water, and ties his hair with a strip of worn cloth. Beside him, his net lies coiled, smelling of silt and fish. Holds the coolness of night. He pushes his boat from the shore and steps inside. The current catches him gently, carrying him toward the center of the river. The city stirs behind him. A door creaks open. The cry of a donkey echoes between walls. Somewhere a child begins to cough, a dry, sleepy sound. From the western quarter comes the faint clang of pottery, a baker striking his kiln to wake the embers. The sun clears the horizon. The light spills down the ziggurat first. That rises above everything else, its surface glowing like amber. Priests move along its terraces in silence, sweeping dust, trimming lamps. Their robes, pale against the gold brick, ripple in the early wind. Below, the shadow of the tower falls long across the city, dividing light from shade. In the market, the first traders arrive. They move slowly, their sandals whispering against the packed dirt. They carry baskets filled with grain, pottery, and small bundles of herbs wrapped in linen. They speak little. The air is still too cool, the sun too soft. They lay out their wares and wait. The smell of crushed dates and fresh bread begins to drift through the streets. A scribe sits cross-legged beside a small wooden table. His hands are stained with clay. He presses a reed stylus into a tablet, marking lines that only a few in the city can read. Each symbol catches the light, sharp and shallow. He pauses often, lifting his eyes to the street, not to see, but to feel. The hum of life grows around him. The low murmur of merchants, the clatter of amphorae, the quiet voices of women trading cloth for oil. Beyond the market, in a narrow lane where the sun barely reaches, a woman grinds barley between two stones. The sound is rhythmic, steady, stone on stone, breath on breath. Her child sits beside her, drawing patterns in the dust with a stick. Above them, the walls lean inward, their surfaces cool and damp with morning shade. The Euphrates? The end of the street. The fisherman has returned, his boat heavy with his catch, silver flashes of fish piled in a woven basket. He carries it on his shoulder, water dripping from his arms, the scent of the river following him like a second skin. He passes the potter's stall, where clay takes shape beneath wet hands, bowls, jars, small figures meant for offerings. The wheel turns slowly, the sound low and circular, like the voice of the earth. In the courtyard of a temple, a priest lights the first oil lamp of the day. The flame wavers, small and bright, reflecting in the polished bronze bowl. The smell of burning oil drifts upward, mingling with the scent of dust and dried flowers. He murmurs words too old to be translated, sounds meant not for men, but for the gods who sleep in stone. By midday, the city hums with heat. The air trembles above the streets. The shadows shorten. Merchants call softly from behind their stalls. Their voices seem distant, softened. Boy runs past, barefoot, carrying a clay jug filled with water. He moves through the crowd without a sound, his hair wet from the river. The fisherman sleeps now, his head resting on his folded arms. The woman with the barley has set her grinding aside, the stones cooling in the shade. The scribe still writes, his hands slow and patient. A stray dog curls near his feet, its ribs rising and falling with each breath. The ziggurat stands motionless above it all. From its highest terrace, the priests look out over the city, the winding streets, the flat roofs, the slow glitter of the Euphrates. The light makes the river seem endless. It bends and disappears into haze, carrying with it the reflection of towers and palms, of lives lived in quiet rhythm. And as the day deepens, Babylon exhales. The sound of the market fades. The sky turns pale again. Soon the fires will be lit, and the lamps along the temples will flicker like distant stars. But for now, the city rests. Heartbeat of an empire pulsing beneath the weight of the sun. Time itself moves no faster than the river. The Euphrates flows on, carrying the reflection of the sky in its slow current. And Babylon, vast and alive, continues its endless whisper, a city of breath, clay, and light beneath the sands of history. Afternoon settled like a weight upon the city. The sun pressed against the rooftops, turning every stone and wall into a slow furnace. The air shimmered. The narrow streets once filled with the sound of trade grew quiet as shutters closed and the marketplace emptied. Babylon had entered its stillest hour. The watchmen on the walls leaned beneath the shade of their spears. Dogs slept in the dust, tongues lolling from their mouths. Even the river slowed, its surface a sheet of gold and silence. The sound of insects filled the heat, thin and endless. In the inner quarter, where the richer homes were built of baked brick and cedar beams, the air smelled faintly of incense. Curtains hung over the doorways to keep out the light. A servant poured water from a bronze jug into a clay bowl. The droplets hissed as they hit the hard surface. Inside, a woman reclined on a low couch, fanning herself with a palm leaf. Beside her, a musician plucked a small lyre, his notes soft and deliberate. Music meant not to be heard, but to fill the space between breaths. Farther north, the temple cast its shadow over the square. Its gates stood open, heavy bronze. A pair of priests crossed the courtyard, carrying small jars of oil and rolls of woven cloth. The air within the temple was cool, scented with smoke and flowers. At the heart of the sanctuary stood the statue of the god, carved from stone, its face expressionless, its eyes darkened by the smoke of centuries. One of the priests knelt. He poured the oil carefully over the altar, his hands steady despite the heat. The oil hissed as it met the bronze surface, releasing a faint, bitter smell. Sound was swallowed by the vast stillness of the room. Outside, the first breezes of evening began to move. They slid along the river, bending the reeds and carrying dust through the streets. The air softened. The color of the city changed, from gold to red, from red to brown, until every wall seemed to glow with its own quiet fire. Children emerged first. They ran barefoot through the alleys, chasing each other's shadows, their laughter echoing faintly off the walls. The sound was thin but alive, a pulse against the fading day. In the market, merchants reopened their stalls. The smell of roasted grain and sweet dates returned to the air. Lamps were lit, one by one. The city's glow returned. Thin threads of smoke rose from the ovens, blending with the dusk. By the river, fishermen untied their boats again. The water was cooler now, its surface broken by ripples of reflected light. One of them, the same man who had gone out at dawn, stood barefoot at the edge, his shadow stretching long behind him. He lifted his net, its cords wet and gleaming, and cast it out. The sound it made, a soft splash, was swallowed by the murmur of the river. A little farther downstream, women gathered at the shallows. They washed cloth in slow, circular motions, talking quietly between strokes. Their voices carried just enough to be heard from the riverbank, fragments of sentences, names, the rhythm of ordinary life. A baby cried once, then was hushed against a shoulder. Sun dipped lower, the ziggurat came alive once more. Its terraces caught the last of the light, each step glowing orange before sinking into shadow. The priests returned to the upper platform to light the fire that would burn through the night. The smoke rose straight into the still air, pale against the darkening sky. On the city's rooftops, families gathered to eat. They sat on woven mats, their meals simple: bread, lentils, water, sometimes a small bowl of dried fruit. The voices of thousand lives wove together, soft laughter, murmured prayers, the faint ring of a pot set down too hard. It was a sound not of noise, but of existence. And as the evening deepened, the light changed once more. The sky turned violet, then blue, then black. Stars appeared one by one, their reflections trembling in the river. The lamps of the city burned steadily, each flame like a small heartbeat. Somewhere a flute began to play, slow, wavering, carried on the wind. Its notes moved houses and over the water, fading and returning like breath. The fisherman hauled in his last catch. His hands were rough, his face streaked with river water. He lifted the basket, heavy with silver flashes, and walked homeward along the bank. His steps made no sound. The sand clung to his feet. In the market, the final voices fell silent. The traders closed their stalls, covering the goods with cloth. A stray dog trotted through the empty square, its tail low, its eyes following the last of the light. The priests extinguished the smaller lamps in the lower temple halls, leaving only the great fire burning on the ziggurate's summit. Its glow reached the river and the city gates, a soft flame pulsing in the vast dark. Babylon exhaled again. The sound of the river returned, low, slow, unending. The scent of the fires mingled with the wind, carrying upward, beyond the walls, across the sleeping fields. A scribe, still awake in his small chamber, wrote by the light of an oil lamp. Stylus pressed into the soft clay, each mark deliberate, precise. He did not know what he was writing for, whether for trade, for record, or for memory, but the act itself was enough. Each symbol a moment preserved, a fragment of time fixed against the flood of forgetting. He finished, placed the tablet beside the others, and extinguished the flame. The darkness closed around him, and so the city slept. The Euphrates whispered in its slow voice, the fire on the ziggurat burned. Walls of Babylon, cracked, warm, eternal, stood beneath the stars. No battle cry, no king's decree. Just the hum of existence stretched across eternity, and the faint, endless sound of water moving through the heart of the world. The night deepened over Babylon, soft and absolute. The last color drained from the sky, leaving only the low gleam of stars, scattered like dust across the heavens. The heat of the day faded from the stones. The air cooled, thick with the scent of oil ash. River mist. The great city exhaled, settling into its long, rhythmic sleep. The Euphrates was a dark ribbon beneath the moon. Its current moved slowly, carrying faint reflections of firelight from the ziggurat and the lamps that still burned on rooftops. The sound of the river was constant, patient, deep, like breathing through stone. In the harbor district, the boats were tied tight to their moorings. Ropes creaked in the quiet. The fishermen who had labored since dawn now slept beneath. Nets, their bodies curved against the boards. Only the sound of the water, the murmur of it against the hulls, broke the silence. A stray wind wandered through the city, drifting through narrow alleys and low courtyards, slipping beneath reed mats and along the edges of clay roofs. It carried the smell of wet earth, the faint sweetness of grain, the dry perfume of crushed flowers from the temple gardens. Somewhere a guard walked the wall. His sandals made a slow rhythm on the stone, one step, a pause, then another. He carried a bronze-tipped spear that caught the moonlight with each turn. His eyes followed the river's curve as it disappeared into the horizon, his breath forming a thin mist that rose and vanished in the cool air. Below him, the streets lay silent. A few dogs lingered in the open, their shapes pale in the moonlight. One lifted its head, listening to the distant call of an owl, then lay down again. At the temple of Ishtar, the night priests began their quiet rituals. Inside the sanctum, lamps flickered along the walls, their flames reflected in polished copper bowls. A faint hum of chanting filled the air, low, slow, a sound that seemed older than the city itself. It was not music, not prayer, but something between breath and memory. One of the priests knelt beside a basin of water. The surface quivered from the vibration of his voice. He dipped his hands, raised them, and let the drops fall back again, the ripples spreading in perfect circles until reflection of the flame broke apart. Outside, the wind had changed. It came now from the south, carrying with it the faint, metallic scent of distant rain. The first storm of the season, perhaps still a day away. The night birds stirred. On a rooftop overlooking the river, a scribe sat awake. His lamp burned low, the oil nearly gone. Before him lay a tablet of drying clay. He had written no words, only lines, sketches of waves, marks that had begun as symbols but turned in. Not right for the archive or for trade, he wrote for the sound of the stylus in the clay, for the feeling of time passing through his hands. He paused, looking out at the city. Babylon under moonlight was not loud or golden now, only vast, soft, endless. The walls glimmered faintly, the streets were silver with dust, and the ziggurat rose into the night like a mountain carved from shadow. He thought of the people sleeping, the potters, the merchants, the fishermen, the women washing cloth by the river, the priests whispering to their guards, all of them part of the same steady rhythm, each one a breath in the chest of the city. Somewhere far below, a door closed. The sound was small, final, familiar. He smiled faintly, extinguished his lamp, and lay back on the mat. The air was cool against his face. He could hear the river from here, the faint sound of water brushing stone. The fire on the ziggurat burned through the night. Its smoke rose straight into the still air, a pale column, reaching upward until it dissolved among the stars. And beneath it, Babylon slept on. The walls, the river, the temples, the empty streets, all part of the same slow heartbeat that had pulsed here for centuries. The sound of life not measured by moments, but by breath, by dust, by the endless turning of the sky. When dawn came again, it would come quietly, light seeping into the cracks of clay, touching the river, waking the city once more. But for now, the world held still. The whispered, the wind carried the scent of rain, and Babylon, ancient, patient, eternal, dreamed beneath the stars. Before dawn, the city breathed again. Not loudly, not all at once, but in small, scattered motions, like the slow turning of the earth. A gate creaked open at the northern wall. Somewhere a jug tipped, spilling water across the stone. The sound of sandals brushing dust returned to the streets, soft and unhurried. The air was cooler now. The sky above Babylon had begun to thin, grey light gathering behind the black silhouette of the ziggurat. The stars dimmed one by one. The river shimmered faintly, like a vein of glass cutting through the heart of the city. By the riverbank, the fishermen stirred from their sleep. They rose without words, the motions of their bodies shaped by habit. The oldest among them waded knee-deep into the water, his hands testing the current. The river's pull was slow, deliberate, steady. He nodded once and began to untie the first boat. The others followed. As they pushed off, the silence deepened. The sound of the oars entered the air, a quiet rhythm, almost like breathing. The scent of wet rope and reed filled the dawn. In the city, the first fires were being lit. The smell of smoke and baking bread spread through the narrow alleys. Merchants lifted the wooden shutters of their stalls, the hinges groaning with age. Clay jars clinked together, and the faint laughter of a child carried from an unseen courtyard. A woman swept her doorstep with a bundle of reeds. Each stroke raised a small cloud of dust that caught the first light. She paused to stretch her back and looked upward toward the ziggurat. Its peak was already gold, bathed in sunlight while the city below remained in shadow. She whispered something under her breath, not a prayer, not quite a name, and returned to her work. At the temple, the night priests extinguished the lamps one by one. The smoke from the last flame curled upward, pale, thin. They bowed before the altar, their movements unhurried, their voices low. Outside, the morning wind entered through the gates, stirring the heavy curtains, bringing with it the faint murmur of the waking city. The streets began to fill again, slowly, naturally. A donkey brayed. Potters carried stacks of half-dried bowls to the kilns. Scribes arrived at the courtyard of the palace offices, their hands already dusted with clay. The sound of life returned in layers. Sandals on stone, the creak of carts, the gentle splash of water being poured from one jar to another. Down by the river, the fishermen hauled their nets, the cords glistening with dew. The first catch of the morning shimmered in the sunlight, small, silver fish twisting in a rhythm older than the city itself. They worked in silence, passing baskets from one to the next, the motion of their hands practiced and seamless. Farther upstream, a boy crouched at the water's edge. He floated a small reed boat, his fingers pushing it gently into the current. The river caught it and carried it away, turning it slowly, drawing it toward the heart of the city. He watched until it vanished, then stood and ran home, his footprints fading quickly in the wet sand. By mid-morning, the heat returned. The wind lost its coolness. The air shimmered again above the rooftops. The shadow of the ziggurat shrank back into its own base, leaving the streets to the full weight of the sun. A scribe sat beneath a canopy, the clay tablet before him nearly dry. He had written all morning, recording the exchange of grain and oil. But now his hands slowed, and his eyes drifted to the river. He could see the glint of sunlight on the boats, hear the faint laughter of traders haggling in the heat. The marks he had pressed into the clay seemed smaller than before, fleeting, almost fragile. He lifted the stylus once more and pressed a single new line into the corner of the tablet, not a word, but a curve, lie. River itself. Then he set the tablet aside. Across the city, life continued quietly, steadily, with no beginning and no end. The same gestures repeated, the sweeping of a floor, the pouring of oil, the binding of reeds. No one hurried, no one stopped. At the top of the ziggurat, the high priest stood alone. The world below shimmered in heat and light, the roofs, the courtyards, the glint of the river. He closed his eyes and felt the wind move across his face. From here, the sun was one long murmur, a single note that never changed, a living hum that belonged to time itself. He breathed it in. He exhaled slowly. And beneath him, Babylon endured, vast and fragile, loud and silent, old and new all at once. The city moved through another morning as it always had, caught between river and sky, between memory and forgetting. The Euphrates flowed on, indifferent and eternal, carrying the scent of the city downstream, the smell of oil, of bread, of smoke. The far horizon, where even the guards could no longer tell where the river ended and the sea began. By the time the sun reached its height, the entire city shimmered beneath it. The walls of Babylon rippled with heat, and the air above the rooftops seemed to bend. The scent of clay and dust grew thick, clinging to every surface. The Euphrates, wide and patient, moved more slowly now, its current dulled by the weight of the afternoon. The riverbanks were quiet. Fishermen had long since pulled their boats ashore, leaving nets to dry in neat spirals along the mud. A few children lingered by the water's edge, pressing their hands into the soft earth, shaping small figures that melted as soon as the sun touched them. Within the city, the market slept. Merchants rested in the shade of their stalls, heads tilted back, faces hidden beneath cloths. A jug of water tipped and rolled in the dust. Somewhere nearby, a camel snorted once, then fell still again. The only movement came from river breeze, faint and rare. It carried a thread of sound, the creak of distant wood, the flap of fabric, a man's soft cough. Then it was gone, leaving only the hum of the flies and the weight of heat pressing down. In the outer quarter, a potter worked alone. His hands, dark with clay, moved in perfect rhythm, shaping the spinning form before him. The wheel turned slowly, the sound of it steady, eternal. The clay rose, thinned, and widened under his fingers. He did not hurry. Each motion followed the one before it with the precision of a lifetime. The part was almost complete, its rim curved like the horizon. He paused, wiped his forehead, and listened. The city, even in its silence, had a pulse, faint, low, a breathing he could feel beneath the earth. He looked toward the ziggurat, a blur of light in the distance. For a moment it seemed to waver, its steps shimmering like the air above a fire. He blinked, and it was still again. In the temple courtyard, the priests had retreated to the shaded corridors. Their voices murmured low, blending with the echo of sandals on stone. One of them sat by a basin filled with water and crushed flowers, stirring it slowly with a bronze spoon. The scent rose and filled the air, soft, cool, almost sweet. A young apprentice entered, carrying a bowl of oil. He hesitated, his eyes drawn upward to the shaft of sunlight that pierced the center of the chamber. Dust drifted through it, each grain visible in the golden light. For a long moment he stood motionless, watching them fall. In a nearby alley, a woman poured grain into a millstone. The sound of grinding filled the stillness, steady and patient. Her arms moved in slow circles, her breath matching the rhythm. Each turn of the stone was like the turning of time itself, unseen but unstoppable. A small lizard scurried across the wall beside her, pausing in the shadow before disappearing into a crack. The sound of its movement was almost nothing, yet in this, it seemed enormous. The hours passed like this, unnoticed, unmarked. The city did not move toward anything. It simply existed in its own endless present. And then, without warning, the light began to change. The gold turned red. The edges of the building softened, their shadows stretching long across the ground. The air cooled slightly, and the faintest breeze stirred again, lifting the dust in quiet spirals. The river caught the color first. Its surface turned to copper, then deep crimson. Then shadow. The boats that had been pulled ashore were now outlined in orange light, their shapes long and sharp against the water. From somewhere within the temple, a bell rang once. The sound was deep and pure, carrying across the city. It was not a call, not a warning, simply a mark of the hour, a signal that day was fading. The potter placed his finished vessel beside the others. The clay still glistened, wet and warm. He stood, his back stiff, and looked toward the horizon. Along the top of the ziggurat, figures began to move. The priests lit the evening fires. The flames caught quickly, climbing up the wicks, their light visible even from the farthest edge of the city. Smoke curled upward, twisting in the red sky. People began to emerge again, from homes, from courtyards, from shadow. They spoke softly to one another, their words slow and blurred by the heat. The smell of cooking drifted through the streets, lentils, onions, and roasted grain. The sound of the day returned in. Fragments, a bowl being set down, a voice calling a name, laughter from a rooftop. The Euphrates reflected it all, the red sky, the smoke, the firelight, breaking each image into ripples and carrying it away. Above it, the city's towers glowed like embers. The first stars began to show through the fading light, one by one, faint and sharp. And Babylon, heavy with the memory of heat and dust and sun, exhaled once more. The night rose slowly from the earth. The fires brightened. The river deepened again, and in the stillness between dusk and dark, the world felt eternal, as if this moment, this balance between light and silence, had lasted forever and would never end. The sun had fallen completely now. The last of its light clung to the upper terraces of the ziggurat before slipping away, leaving the city washed in blue and shadow. The air cooled in layers, first the rooftops, then the walls, then the streets. The heat of the day bled slowly from the earth, and Babylon began to breathe again. Fires glowed along the riverbanks. Their reflections shimmered in the slow current, bending with every ripple of the Euphrates. The smell of smoke and oil drifted upward, mingling with the scent of baked clay and evening air. In the narrow alleys, lamps flickered in small alcoves, casting trembling light over the mud-brick walls. On a rooftop near the northern gate, a family gathered for supper. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the city below faint. And steady, distant voices, the occasional bleating of a goat, the clang of a pot being cleaned in water. The father broke a loaf of flatbread, passing pieces to his wife and children. Steam rose from a clay bowl of lentils. The mother poured water into small cups carved from alabaster. No one hurried. From another roof nearby came the sound of a flute. The melody was slow and wandering, its notes rising and falling with the wind. The youngest child turned his head to listen, his eye half closed. The music carried across the rooftops, mingling with the smell of food and the faint rustle of the palm fronds swaying above the courtyard walls. Down below, the marketplace was empty except for a few men carrying baskets toward the storehouses. Their footsteps echoed softly, hollow against the stones. Cats prowled among the abandoned stalls, slipping through the shadows, pausing to lick their paws before vanishing again. At the temple of Marduk, the evening prayers had ended. The priests moved like shadows, extinguishing the lower lamps one by one. Only the fire atop the ziggurat remained, a small, constant flame that flickered against the stars. From far away, it looked like the heartbeat of the city itself, pulsing in rhythm with the slow turning of the river. Along the outer wall, guards took their posts. They spoke little. The torches in their hands sputtered against the wind, each one casting long, thin lines of light across the stones. Beyond the wall strip, the open plain, vast, dark, and silent. The horizon was invisible now, the world reduced to the glow of the city and the faint hum of the wind. In the harbor district, a few late boats drifted in. Men called softly to one another, tying ropes to the wooden posts, unloading baskets filled with fish. The air was cool and wet. The water lapped gently at the hulls. A dog barked once from the far shore, its sound lost in the distance. As the night deepened, the rhythm of the city slowed. Doors closed, fires dimmed. The voices faded until only the river remained. Its sound was endless, the low whisper of water over stone, constant, unhurried, the same voice that had spoken through every night since the city was built. A scribe sat awake near the palace walls. His lamp burned low, the flame small and golden. He was not writing now, only watching the smoke curl upward, the soft motion of it fading into the dark. The clay tablets beside him were still warm. Surface marked with lines that told of debts, of names, of harvests, records of a day already gone. He looked toward the ziggurat. The fire still burned. The stars above it shimmered like tiny reflections in water. He thought of how many nights had passed like this, the same wind, the same flame, the same unending sound of the river. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened. There was nothing to fear in the silence. It was too old, too familiar. It was the sound of time itself, endlessly forward. The watchmen on the wall shifted their spears. The torches guttered and then steadied. From somewhere within the dark, an owl called once. Babylon slept. The city, heavy with memory, rested beneath its 1,000 fires. The river, patient as stone, whispered its eternal lullaby through the heart of the world. The air held still, and even the stars seemed reluctant to move. The ziggurat's flame flickered once, a single, trembling breath of light, before rising steady again, burning through the night, and so the hours passed. The city neither woke nor dreamed, but existed somewhere between the two, suspended in its own quiet eternity, where time, like the Euphrates, flowed without beginning or end. By midnight, the city had become a sea of whispers. The sound of day was gone. No laughter, no hammers, no trade. Only the quiet that lives in old stone, the breathing of walls, the sigh of wood, the faint rhythm of distant water. Babylon slept in layers. Courtyards, riverbanks, all wrapped in stillness. The moon hung low above the ziggurat. Its light fell in long, silver lines across the steps, turning the temple's shadow into a black, perfect triangle stretching into the city. The fire at its summit burned softly now, its glow steady, its smoke thin and straight. The Euphrates was darker than the sky. It moved without sound, its surface so smooth that the reflection of the moon trembled only when the faintest breeze touched it. Boats gently against their moorings, their ropes creaking like old voices. The smell of wet reed and oil clung to the air. In the poorer quarter, the night had no boundaries. People slept where the air was softest, on roofs, beside doorways, under scraps of woven cloth. A woman turned in her sleep and pulled her child closer, the faint murmur of their breathing blending with the hum of insects. A jar cracked somewhere, a soft, brittle sound, and a dog barked once, then fell silent again. Up where the stone roads widened and the air smelled faintly of incense, a guard walked his route along the outer wall. He carried a torch that burned weakly, the light flickering over his armor and the rough bricks beneath his feet. His steps were slow, deliberate. Every few moments he would pause, look toward the plain and listen, but there was nothing beyond the wall tonight. Only the endless horizon and the faint shiver of wind moving through the tall grass. He reached the tower at the corner of the gate, set the torch into a metal ring, and leaned on his spear. The fire's reflection flickered across his eyes. He looked out again, tracing the faint line where the earth met the stars. Below him, the river gleamed. On the far bank, the silhouettes of palms swayed faintly in the night breeze. For a moment he thought he saw something, a movement, perhaps, or the shimmer of fabric, but when he blinked, there was nothing. Only the long, dark shape of the plain. He exhaled. Slowly, the sound vanishing into the night. Back within the city, a scribe stirred from his light sleep. He rose quietly, careful not to wake the others in his house, and stepped onto the roof. The air was cool now, and the tiles beneath his feet still held a trace of warmth from the day. He sat cross-legged and watched the moonlit city below, the rooftops like islands, the alleys like rivers of shadow. From up here, Babylon looked infinite. The ziggurat stood in the distance like the world, its peak lost in the pale haze. He could see faint trails of smoke still rising from the temple fires. Beyond it, the river shone, the only thing that truly moved in the stillness. He closed his eyes. The sound of the Euphrates reached him faintly, as though it came from beneath the earth rather than across it. It was steady, slow, almost human, a kind of heartbeat. He thought of the city as a living thing, breathing, dreaming, shifting in its sleep. Each fire a pulse, each a vein. He wondered how many generations had sat beneath this same sky, hearing the same river, believing the same silence to be eternal. And yet the silence was never truly still. Beneath it, time moved, clay crumbled, water shaped stone, words were forgotten. He picked up a shard of broken pottery from the edge of the roof, smooth on one side, rough on the other. Once it had held water or wine or grain. Now it was nothing. He ran his thumb along its edge, feeling the years. Down. Then he let it fall. It struck the ground below with a dull sound and vanished into the dust. He remained there until his lamp burned out. The sky above the city had turned darker still, the stars clearer, sharper. He could see their reflections quivering faintly in the river, scattered like pieces of glass. Somewhere, a temple bell rang once low, distant, solitary. The note spread slowly through the air, rolling like a wave over the rooftops. It reached him seconds later, so soft, felt more imagined than heard. Then it faded, leaving nothing behind but the river's voice. The guard on the wall shifted his stance, the torchlight glinting faintly on his armor. The woman in the poor quarter stirred again, half dreaming. The priests in the upper chamber of the ziggurat knelt beside their fire, whispering prayers to the gods of water and wind. And all through the sleeping streets, the same silence remained, vast, weightless, endless. Babylon under the stars was neither past nor present. It existed outside the line of time, caught between the whisper of the river and the hum of the earth. The Euphrates moved on, slow and eternal. The city dreamed, and the world, wide, patient, indifferent, kept turning around it. In the final hours before dawn, the city balanced on the edge of waking and dream. The air was cool now, touched by the faintest trace of mist drifting from the river. It hung low over the streets, thin and silver, softening every edge, muting every sound. The lamps that still burned seemed to float in it, their flames suspended like small stars over pools of darkness. The Euphrates whispered more clearly in this hour. Its current had deepened, fed by night water flowing down from the distant hills. It carried with it the scent of wet earth, of the world beyond the walls, places unseen, where no torch burned and no prayer was spoken. The fishermen, always the first to stir, rose from their mats along the shore. They moved like ships, their motions slow and wordless. One checked the ropes, another pushed a boat into the water. The wood groaned softly, the sound like a sigh. They spoke in murmurs that did not disturb the stillness, as if the city itself were sleeping and must not be woken too soon. In the temple district, the priests of the dawn began their work. They climbed the narrow stairways of the ziggurat, their robes brushing the stone, carrying small bowls of oil and flame. Their footsteps echoed faintly, the sound swallowed almost at once by the open air. When they reached the summit, they placed the bowls upon the altar and waited. Below them, the city was still dim, a vast ocean of roofs and walls washed in pale blue light. The fires of the night had died down, leaving behind only a few coils of smoke. The sky above the plains was beginning to pale, a faint band of silver stretching across the horizon. A breeze moved through the streets, stirring dust and ashes. The smell of the river drifted. The open courtyards, cool and faintly sweet. In one such courtyard, a woman knelt beside a basin of water. She dipped a cloth, wrung it out, and wiped the dust from her child's face. The boy stirred but did not wake. The sound of her hands in the water was small, like the quiet rhythm of a heartbeat. Farther away, in the scribe's quarter, the night watchman passed the last of his rounds. He paused beside the wall of the archive, where rows of clay tablets were kept in neat stack. Smelled of earth and oil. He reached out, his hand brushing the edge of a shelf, and felt the cold surface of a tablet, still damp from the previous day's writing. He lifted it briefly, tilted it toward the torchlight. The symbols pressed into its surface looked like rivers winding through dust. He set it back carefully. Outside, the first light of morning touched the river. It spread slowly, sliding across the surface like oil. The fishermen paused in their rowing to watch it, a thin blade of gold cutting through the blue. The air changed with it. The mist began to rise, curling upward from the water and dissolving into the sky. At the top of the ziggurat, the high priest lifted his hand toward the horizon. The fire at the altar flickered once, then steadied. The wind caught his robe and filled it like a sail. He said nothing. There was no need for words. The act of standing there between the river and the sun was itself a prayer. Down below, the city stirred again. Doors opened, steps sounded on stone. Somewhere a part struck another part, and the faint ring carried through the still air like a bell. The rhythm of daily life began to rise, slow, measured, patient. The baker lit his kiln. The smell of smoke returned. The merchants uncovered their stalls. The sound of baskets and jars. The first donkey brayed. The first laugh broke the silence. The city had not changed, and yet every morning felt like a beginning. The scribe awoke to the light creeping across floor. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and listened. The sound of the river reached him clearly now, mingled with the faint calls of traders preparing their goods. He stood, walked to the window, and watched the day arrive. The light touched the tops of the walls first, then the rooftops, then the streets. The ziggurat shone as though made of fire. The priests descended slowly from its terraces, the smoke from their offerings drifting behind them in thin white ribbons. The fisherman pulled his first net from the water. The woman in the courtyard hung her cloth to dry. The watchman handed his post to another and disappeared into the waking streets. The city was whole again, awake, breathing. And yet beneath the sound of trade and footsteps and fire, the same quiet heartbeat continued, the slow pulse of the river, the whisper of the wind, the weight of time pressing gently on the stones. Babylon lived not in its noise, but in its silence. It was there, between the moments, between calls of merchants and the songs of priests, a stillness vast enough to hold the whole world. The Euphrates gleamed once more beneath the sun, carrying the memory of night away. And the city, ancient and endless, began another day exactly as it always had, as if time itself had never learned to move at all. As the morning advanced, the haze over Babylon turned golden. The light poured down like slow honey, filling every crevice of the city. The sound of the day began to rise, not, but in waves, soft and uneven, spreading from the river outward through the streets. The Euphrates gleamed as though it carried the sky itself. Along its banks, men bent over baskets of fish, their arms slick with water and sunlight. Nets hung from poles, shimmering with drops that caught the light like glass. A boy balanced on a low wall beside the water, tossing pebbles into the current. Each splash was swallowed instantly, as if the river were absorbing even the smallest act of noise. The heat came quickly. By mid-morning, the air was thick again. The sky turned white, and the edges of every shadow sharpened. The city slowed. The rhythm of the day became deliberate, careful, adapted to the weight of the sun. In the market square, traders set out their wares: dates, copper, cloth, baskets of grain. The colors were subdued: ochre, clay, faded blue. The smell of the stalls mingled with the sweetness of the bakers' ovens. A woman brushed flour from her hands and leaned against a wall, her gaze following the slow drift of smoke rising toward the sky. The scribes had gathered in the open courtyard beside the temple offices. They sat cross-legged in the dust, clay tablets before them, their styluses moving steadily. Their work was quiet but constant, recording grain tallies, debts, names, births. One of them stopped for a moment and rubbed his wrist. His hand trembled slightly from the hours of writing. He looked up, blinked against the brightness, and saw the shadow creeping slowly across the ground toward him. The priests moved like figures carved from light. Their white robes shimmered with dust. They carried bowls of water, oil, and crushed flowers, their pace unhurried, their faces serene. In the open courtyards of the temple, the smell of incense clung to the air, thick, bitter, almost sweet. A faint chant drifted from the inner chambers, voices low and harmonic, blending with the distant sound of the wind against the stone. Outside the temple district, Babylon pulsed with its own quiet life. A craftsman repaired a cartwheel, his hammer rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. A group of children gathered around a clay trough, shaping wet earth into small figures, animals, houses, tiny ziggurats no taller than a hand. They pressed their fingerprints into the surface of the clay, laughing softly when it cracked. The smallest among them splashed water on the figures to keep them from drying too quickly. In a shaded alley, a ground barley with a stone pestle. The motion was slow and circular. Her hands were rough, her eyes half closed against the light. Each turn of the stone made a sound like breathing, steady, patient, endless. When she paused, she wiped her hands on her tunic and looked upward. The faintest trace of cloud was visible, a thin white line drawn across the blue. From the rooftops, the city looked almost still. The air shimmered above it like water. Smoke rose in thin vertical lines from lamps. The ziggurat stood at its center, immense and pale, the sunlight burning against its terraces. To the north, the river curved away, disappearing into haze. To the south, the walls stretched to the horizon, their gates like open mouths. In the shadow of the wall, soldiers rested on low benches, their spears stacked neatly beside them. They spoke quietly, their voices soft and even. One of them leaned his head back against the stone and closed his eyes. The sound of the city around them. Faint bells, a donkey braying, a cartwheel creaking was no louder than the wind. As midday passed, the heat grew heavier. Even the birds had gone silent. The sound of the Euphrates dulled, as though the air itself were too thick to carry it. The river's surface shimmered, its edges bending with light. The fisherman who had gone out before dawn returned, his boat heavy with the day's catch. He stepped ashore, the water reaching his knees, and lifted a basket to his shoulder. His wife waited. Near the market, a cloth wrapped around her hair. She took the basket from him and smiled faintly, saying nothing. He nodded once and turned back toward the river, his body already moving with the rhythm of habit. In a small courtyard behind the temple, an old man sat beside a fig tree. He had been a builder once, one of those who had laid the lower stones of the ziggurat long ago. His hands rested on his knees, the veins like roots beneath his skin. The figs above him were scent heavy in the air. He listened to the sound of a nearby fountain water trickling through a narrow channel of clay and remembered the feel of wet mortar between his fingers. He had built walls that would outlive him, stairs that would be climbed long after his name was forgotten. The thought did not trouble him. He smiled faintly and closed his eyes. The sun warmed his face. By late afternoon, the light changed again. The color of the city softened. The edges blurred. The air filled. Once more with movement, the slow return of voices, footsteps, carts. The sound of tools resumed, the scrape of a potter's knife, the whistle of an ironworker cooling a blade in water. A faint breeze stirred the dust along the streets. The ziggurat's shadow lengthened, stretching across rooftops and walls until it reached the river. The priests lit new torches along the terraces. Their flames wavered in the wind, thin lines of gold against the deepening sky. The Euphrates darkened again, surface turning from silver to bronze. Boats returned to the shore. Lamps were lit along the embankment. The city glowed softly, thousands of small fires flickering within the folds of dusk. From the highest terrace, the high priest watched the sun sink below the horizon. He raised his hands in silence, not in praise or fear, but in acknowledgement. Another day, passed and received, another breath in the endless rhythm of the world. Below him, the fires brightened. The wind cooled. And Babylon, ancient and alive, folded itself once more into the calm of evening, its heart beating in perfect time with the river that never stopped flowing, the earth that never stopped turning, and the sky that had always been the same. As the light faded once more, the air over Babylon turned heavy and gold. The edges of the city melted into shadow, the distant walls glowing faintly with the last reflection of the sun. The sound of day broke apart into fragments, a closing door. Calling a name, the creak of rope against wood. Then, slowly, the great quiet returned. The Euphrates was bronze now, its surface moving with the slow rhythm of evening. The smell of water and silt drifted up from the banks, mingled with smoke from the first cooking fires. In the distance, the ziggurat burned with light again, its terraces traced by torches, its summit crowned by a single, steady flame. The firelight wavered against the sky like a heartbeat. At the base of the ziggurat, priests gathered for the evening rites. Their white robes glowed faintly in the darkness as they formed a slow procession along the lower terrace. Bells chimed once, low, deep and long. The sound moved through the city, carried by the wind, reaching every corner before fading into silence. In the market square, the day's dust hung in the air, golden at first, then grey. The merchants closed their stalls, folding their awnings and stacking their baskets. A few lingered, counting coins by. Lamplight, the smell of dates and baked grain clung to the stones. The shadows deepened, swallowing the outlines of jars, ropes, clay vessels. The market emptied, leaving only the faint whisper of sandals against the ground. By the river, fishermen mended their nets by hand. Their fingers moved slowly, deliberately, twisting cords with the patience of habit. One of them began to hum a low tune, a song without words, older than memory. The others joined softly, their voices blending into. Wind, The sound of it was like the movement of water, steady, circular, without beginning or end. Across the water, the far bank glowed faintly. Small fires burned among the palms where farmers and travelers rested before dawn. The light shimmered through the haze, and for a moment it seemed as if stars had fallen into the river itself. The air cooled. The first stars appeared, faint, trembling one by one. The moon rose slowly, silvering the edges of rooftops and domes. A dog barked. From the northern gate, a part shattered in some unseen courtyard, and laughter followed, brief and soft. Then the city settled again. A scribe worked late in the temple's outer hall. The lamp beside him burned low, its flame bending with every faint gust of air. His stylus pressed shallow lines into the wet clay, careful and precise. His work was not for kings, not for history. It was a list of grain owed, oil measured, jars counted. Yet his movements were reverent, each mark. He paused, he listened. The temple's silence was vast, filled with the faint crackle of fire, the soft flutter of cloth. He set the stylus down and flexed his hand. The lines on the tablet glimmered in the light. He reached for another piece of clay, but stopped, his gaze drawn upward to the sound of wind moving through the high openings of the temple roof. The air was cool there, faintly perfumed with smoke and flowers. He thought of the people outside, the fishermen, the potters, the guards. On the walls, each was living a life that would pass like this clay when it dried, solid for a while, then broken, scattered, forgotten. He smiled faintly at the thought, not in sadness, but in understanding. On the rooftops, families sat together in the cool air. They spoke softly, their voices drifting above the streets. Children leaned against their mothers, watching the stars. The glow from their lamps moved across their faces, bright one moment, dim the next. Someone poured wine. Someone sang. Someone far off played a flute. The notes were slow and low, almost lost in the wind. From the city's walls, the guards watched the plain. The world beyond was black, shapeless. The torches flickered along the ramparts like a chain of fireflies. Nothing moved beyond them. The earth seemed endless. And yet, beneath all the stillness, Babylon was alive, the breath of 1,000 lives rising and falling together. The air itself seemed to pulse. The river whispered. The torches swayed. Time moved so quietly it could barely be felt. The scribe finished his final line, stamped the tablet with a small seal, and blew out the lamp. Darkness folded over the room. He stepped outside into the courtyard. The moonlight was bright now, washing the city in silver. He stood for a moment, breathing in the cool air, feeling the dust on his skin. The ziggurat towered before him, silent, perfect. The fire at its peak burned steady, and the stars above it looked so near they. Resting on its uppermost stone, he whispered something, not a prayer, not a word, just breathed, shaped by wonder. And as he turned back toward his home, the city exhaled again. The wind moved along the alleys, stirring ashes and silk, carrying with it the smell of oil and water and the faint trace of figs. The Euphrates gleamed one last time before darkness swallowed it completely. The torches along the walls burned low. And Babylon, vast, endless, eternal, sank once more in. Dreaming, its pulse steady beneath the stars, its life measured not in years, but in the soft rhythm of the river flowing forever through the heart of the world. In the deep of night, Babylon seemed to dissolve into air. The streets were empty now, the sounds of laughter and trade long vanished. The city had folded itself into silence, each breath of wind moving through it like memory. Even the river, once restless, now seemed to pause, its wide body gliding darkly, smooth as glass beneath the pale light of the moon. The ziggurat rose at the center, its shape cutting through the sky like a shadow made solid. The fire at its peak was a faint, unwavering spark. It no longer burned to illuminate, only to remind. Along the riverbank, the fishermen slept. Nets lay coiled beside them, wet and heavy, glistening faintly. The boats rocked gently in the slow current, their hulls creaking with the rhythm of water against wood. In the quiet, one could hear the faint dripping of river water. The edges of the planks, the softest sound imaginable, the sound of the city breathing. A few lamps still burned in the temple quarter. Their light reached only a few steps into the dark before vanishing. The courtyards between them were wide and empty. Columns stood like trees in the night, their bases surrounded by pools of still shadow. At the foot of one such column, a young acolyte knelt, head bowed, palms resting on his knees. He had been told to keep the flame through the night. Guard the fire until dawn. The bowl of oil before him flickered faintly, its light reflected in his eyes. He watched it as if watching the heartbeat of the world, the rise, the shimmer, the slow settling of the flame. He could hear the city's pulse beyond the walls, the soft hum of wind, the slow shifting of water, the distant call of an unseen bird. He wondered if the guards heard it too, if they listened to this endless murmur of life, to the sound of their creation resting. From somewhere, near the palace district, came the faint sound of footsteps, a night watchman perhaps making his rounds. His torchlight moved in small circles against the walls, glowing briefly before disappearing again. The acolyte lifted his eyes toward the ziggurat. The fire at its peak trembled once in the wind, then steadied. He felt its light reach him, even across the vast distance, soft but unmistakable. He closed his eyes. In the lower city, the air was cooler, a handful of people. Parter turning clay one last time before sleep, a woman drawing water from a jar, a guard leaning against his spear. The sound of their movements was almost imperceptible, swallowed by the night. A pair of cats chased one another through an alley, their paws silent on the stone. When they stopped, their eyes reflected the moonlight, two small, bright points in the dark. The wind shifted. It came now from the west, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. It slid through the cracks of doors, over rooftops, through the palms that lined the courtyards. The leaves moved softly, their sound like whispers spoken by ghosts. Far beyond the city, the plains glimmered faintly, not with fire, but with dew. The horizon was vast, endless and black. To the watchman on the walls, it seemed that nothing existed beyond it, that Babylon was the only point of light in the whole of the world. And perhaps in that moment it was. The acolyte stirred. The flame before him was burning low. Reached for the small jug of oil, poured a few drops carefully into the bowl, and watched as the flame leapt higher. The reflection of the fire danced on the walls around him, across the carved stone, over the silent faces of the guards. Their eyes caught the light and seemed to move, not alive, but aware. He bowed once more, forehead to the ground, and whispered a line he had been taught since childhood, not for worship, but for stillness. Let the river flow, let the flame endure. Out. The city obeyed. The Euphrates moved with slow certainty, its sound deep and steady, older than every brick in the wall. The ziggurat held its fire. The stars turned. The wind brushed against the rooftops like the touch of water on stone. And Babylon, the heart of the ancient world, lay suspended between sleep and eternity, not dead, not alive, but simply existing as it always had. The night would pass. The light would return. But in this hour, beneath the silent gaze of Gar, city was perfect, a stillness so complete that even time seemed afraid to move. Toward dawn, the silence broke, not with sound, but with light. A faint, colorless glow appeared behind the far walls of Babylon, spreading upward until the stars began to fade. The river caught it first, turning from black to blue to silver. The torches along the walls dimmed one by one as if bowing to the day. The city stirred beneath the veil of mist. Smoke rose again from the temple courtyards. Doors opened. Sandals brushed the dust. The quiet hum of morning began, the rustle of cloth, the clink of clay, the first murmur of human voices returning to the air. On the highest terrace of the ziggurat, the high priest watched the horizon. The fire beside him had burned through the night. He touched the edge of the stone altar, still warm beneath his hand, and whispered a few words not of prayer, but of release. The fire was allowed to rest. The day would carry its own light now. Below him, the city was pale and endless. The roofs and courtyards gleamed faintly with dew. The Euphrates shimmered like a blade of glass, cutting through the heart of it all. He could see the movement beginning, the fishermen returning to their boats, the bakers stoking their fires, the guards stepping down from their posts, the slow rebirth that came every morning, exactly as it had for generations. Down by the river, a fisherman knelt to wash his hands. The water was cold, the current soft. Against his skin, he looked up at the ziggurat, its peak still half shrouded in mist, and thought it looked less like a temple than a mountain, something eternal, older even than the guards carved within it. A woman crossed the path behind him, carrying a jug of water on her shoulder. The weight of it tilted her body slightly, her steps steady, unbroken. She passed without a word, the sound of her feet lost to the murmur of the river. In the temple garden, the young acolyte who had tended Flame all night stepped into the morning air. The mist clung to his robe. He looked up and saw that the color of the sky was changing, pale gray giving way to gold, the first light painting the city walls. The air smelled of clay, ash, and rain. He smiled faintly. The fire he had guarded still burned behind him, but it seemed smaller now, humbled before the sun. From the rooftops came the cry of a single bird. Its voice echoed through the still air, clear and solitary, as if caught. Awake! The sound drifted from one quarter to another until it seemed the whole of Babylon answered, doors opening, voices rising, the slow exhale of life returning. The scribe stepped from his doorway, his tablet under one arm. He paused to look toward the river, the mist lifting now, the surface alive with light. The same river that had moved through every night of his life. He thought of his father and his father's father, and of all those whose hands had shaped the same clay he carried. Now, the city he knew would outlast them all. The sun rose fully then. The light touched the top of the ziggurat first, setting its stone aflame. It slid down the terraces, across the rooftops, through the alleys, over the courtyards. The walls glowed. The air turned warm. And Babylon, weary, eternal, infinite, woke once more. The fishermen pushed their boats into the current. The market opened its stalls. The bells of the temple chimed faintly through the air. Every life, every motion. Every breath fell into its place again, a single rhythm beneath the vast, slow turning of the sky. The Euphrates flowed on, patient and eternal, carrying the reflection of the city upon its surface. The priests descended the steps of the temple, their robes catching the light. The acolyte closed his eyes and felt the warmth on his face. And as the first true rays of morning spread across the plain, Babylon, the city of dust and light, stood between earth and heaven, enduring, breathing. Alive, the night was gone. The world began again. And the river, as always, whispered its same unending song.